So, good evening. I want to welcome you to the third lecture in our IBC Bank and Commerce Bank Keynote Speaker Series for 2024 and 2025. My name is George Clark, and I'm the Director of the Center for the Study of Western Hemispheric Trade in TAMIU's A.R. Sanchez Jr. School of Business. Our center, along with IBC Bank and Commerce Bank, brings speakers to talk about topics in the areas of international trade, economics, finance, demography, immigration, and democracy. So before starting the event, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting the event, IBC and Commerce Bank. With their support, we've been able to bring many thought-provoking speakers over the years to TAMIU and Laredo, so thank you. I also want to do a little bit of housekeeping. At the end of Dr. Amling's presentation, there'll be a question and answer session. We'll take questions from the audience in attendance here live, as well as from those joining us virtually. For those in attendance, if you want to ask your question, please raise your hand so we can bring you a microphone. It's important that you talk into the microphone or the people online won't be able to hear you. So please do that. If you prefer, if you're shy but you want to ask a question but you don't want to stand up and read it out, you can submit it online via Slido using the QR code on the front of your program. For those attending virtually, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature in Teams, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can in the allotted time. For students attending in person and on behalf of one of your classes, you should have had your student ID scanned at the door. In addition, you were provided with a QR code which will take you to an online form where you submit your class information. Finally, you will scan your ID when departing once the lecture is ended. For students attending online, your class information should have been submitted during the registration process. So now we've got over with the housekeeping. I want to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Alan Amling. He's a TED speaker and a leading authority on supply chain transformation and digital disruption. He researches and teaches in the #1 rated Master of Supply Chain program at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and is the CEO of advisory firm Thrive and Advance, LLC. Before becoming a professor, he was the VP of Corporate Strategy at UPS, where he helped revitalize UPS's innovation and venture capital programs for the digital economy. He moved into this role after serving as VP for Marketing for UPS's global logistics and distribution. But he's been working for UPS much longer than that. His first job was loading packages and washing vehicles while he was in college. Yep. His insights have been featured in Fortune, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. And his latest book, which is on sale outside from our bookstore, Organizational Velocity, was published in 2022. So if you want to buy a copy and get it signed by the author, the end of the lecture is the perfect time for that. So let's welcome Dr. Amling to TAMIU and Laredo. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, George. And it is such an honor to be here. Thank you for the Dean, Amy, organizing a wonderful lunch. I just love what's going on at this university. You know, the Dean was talking about how he very much prizes the interaction between industry and the university. I think that's a very special. Are we okay? All right, good. A very special thing. All right. So today we're going to talk about certain uncertainty and strategic decision making. And who thinks there's some uncertainty? Yeah. Oh my. So that's okay. We have some ominous music here. I wonder what that means. Let's go ahead and get ready for it. This is probably how some of you are feeling right now, especially those that are in the business world and trying to keep track of what's going on. This is what's happening. This is all of these headlines that I just cut out of the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. They're all new, and this is the way we feel. Everyone's trying to process the things that are going on in trade policy. And when we think of uncertainty, it doesn't stop there. So what I want to do today is, the uncertainty is certain, right? We all know that. But what do you do? What do you do? So I'm going to talk about, some of these things that are driving risk and uncertainty in business today. And for all of you students, this is something that if you're not facing it today, you will be facing it, right? And it's good to think about, so how do you approach this? Because while these are tumultuous times, it's not the last time, right? It's not the last time. So I want to talk a little bit about, regardless of what happens, what are some things that you should be thinking about, some mindsets that might help you move forward in times of uncertainty? Because what's happening now is, it's when things like this happen, it's fight, flight, or freeze. And there's a lot of freezing going on right now, right? Everything is happening so fast. So what do we do? And the thing is, you can think about the turtle, right? And the turtle gets in its shell and it feels pretty safe, but even the turtle has to eat, right? It's got to move. You have got to keep going. So what are some of those things? And I spent a lot of time when I was at UPS. Boy, I had my share of those head and hand moments where you're at the end of the day and you're like, oh my gosh, how are you going to get through them? And when I went back to school kind of later in life for my doctorate, I was really focused on this question, and I talked to colonels and generals in the military, I talked to C-level leaders, I talked to startups to try to understand how they make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that I learned. And then we're going to end with, okay, what's part of the things in the menu that you should be looking at for strategic decision making in these very difficult times? I'm not going to give you the 8 things you should be doing, because it's going to be different for everybody and it'll change tomorrow. So what are the things that you should be thinking about? So this is interesting, this World Uncertainty Index, which kind of spiked during the pandemic, and then it was actually coming down quite nicely. And then you see it spike even beyond where we were in the pandemic. And that water kind of flowing around, that is where we are right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and we're going to talk about the difference between risk and uncertainty, because you have to approach it differently. So again, we'll get to tariffs, but it's not just tariffs. So technology, there's tremendous change going on in technology, and you talk about uncertainty. If you remember, I think it was a couple weeks back when the Chinese version of ChatGPT came out, the market tanked. We thought that we were way ahead, and we weren't. That caught a lot of people by surprise. Technology is a great enabler, but like anything, it is creating change. And change is either good or bad, depending on what side of it you're on, right? So you want to get on the right side of change. AI, you can't pick up the paper right now without hearing about AI. And I was just at a supply chain technology conference in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and I heard all about it. And one of the big differences about AI is that it is being put to practical use. We're starting to see real applications that are improving the productivity of individuals. And that's the way you should really be thinking about it, is that it's a tool, and it's a tool that allows you to 2x, 3x, sometimes 10x the productivity of individuals, and that's very, very important. The challenge, though, is as you digitize your processes, you digitize the supply chain, information moves very quickly through it. And if some bad information gets in there, you can crash a system very quickly. So there's some puts and takes with technology. Probably the biggest one that we see in supply chain is around cybersecurity. And we're going to see more and more about it. There are companies that are getting hit that are paying the ransom, and you never hear about it. And where they're getting in through employees, through what they call phishing. But they're also getting in through, as we have a more connected supply chain, they're not going into, like my old employer, UPS. They're not going into UPS. They're going into smaller companies in the extended supply chain that may not have the same investments in cybersecurity software. So cybersecurity is a big unknown. Geopolitical, I'm not talking about tariffs. Here I'm talking about the changing world order. We know what's happening right now. We know we just saw what is happening with Ukraine. Don't forget about China, stating very clearly that Taiwan is something that, just like Hong Kong, they believe is theirs. There are a lot of geopolitical issues, and there's a changing world order right now that is very unpredictable. The trade wars, we'll talk a little more about that in a bit. Deglobalization. So globalization has been 3 decades in the making. It really took off when China was accepted into the World Trade Organization. That was 25 years ago. And the reason that we globalize, the reason that we have this international trade is because it allows us to take advantage of, you do this best, you do this best. We're going to stitch together the best, most efficient, lowest cost supply chain, and we're going to use the state-of-the-art supply chain processes and technologies to do that. And it's been working pretty well. Definitely some challenges, especially with China, but it's been working pretty well. So if we want to deglobalize, if we want to pull supply chains back, the danger there is not only is it very difficult, because supply chains are chains. So if you impact one little piece of it, it has a ripple effect through the entire supply chain. We saw that during the pandemic, right? I'll give you an example. Ford Motor Company, they make F-150 pickups in Louisville, Kentucky. They were missing a chip to finish those on the assembly line. But you got to keep the assembly line moving. So the trucks were being made, but they couldn't send them to the dealer because they didn't have these chips. So what'd they do? They started parking them at the Kentucky Motor Speedway. At one point, they had 50,000. It's a chain, and that one little chip cost them a lot of money. So this deglobalization that we're starting to see, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, is creating a lot of uncertainty. Labor skills and availability. Labor is going to be, for all of you students, labor is going to be one of the challenges that we're going to be facing for decades. And we'll talk more about why that is. Natural disasters. I didn't put up climate change because you can debate whether climate change is real or not. You can't debate what's happening with natural disasters and how that is impacting supply chains. And last but not least, good old-fashioned competition. And I talk to a lot of companies about this because, you know, since the pandemic, the word that I hear the most all the time from supply chain leaders is we want to become more resilient. And so during the pandemic, two of the ways that they did that is they diversified suppliers, so I have more suppliers to choose from, and I added safety stock. Both of those things increase cost, okay? Not that they're bad things to do, but they increase cost. And we live in a competitive society. And you need to be careful as you're making changes to your supply chain that you don't go out of business the old-fashioned way, which is being uncompetitive in the marketplace. You have to be competitive. And there's a lot, the technology is allowing a lot of small and mid-sized companies, and I know we have some here. It's a great advantage because technology can be a great equalizer. Some of the technology solutions that we enjoyed at UPS that smaller companies couldn't get, now they have ready access to it through cloud applications. Let's talk about digital and AI. So the biggest change that I've seen in AI is, again, the number of companies that are actually using it and building it into applications. It's driving everything. So it is behind the self-driving vehicles. It's behind automated mobile robots within warehouses. It's behind advanced planning systems that allow you to do predictive analytics. So I always ask an audience, you know, do you think AI is real? And do you see any big applications for it? And I'll ask all of you. Has anyone received a same-day shipment from Amazon? They don't, I guess they don't. Do they not do same day here? That's not a good example. In Atlanta, and a lot of the larger cities, they're same day, they do a lot of same day. And so how do they do that? Well, in order to do a same day shipment, you have to have the product locally, which means you have to predict, before I go to Amazon and click the buy button, they already knew that I was going to buy it. And that's a very clear case for AI. And they're one of the companies that is the most advanced. Robots. In my industry, I'm seeing a huge increase in robots. And one of the big differences is, instead of being point solutions, I'm starting to see robots that hand off to other robots. So I'm seeing interaction between robots. There's cobots, which are humans working with robots. I see that a lot in fulfillment centers, where you used to have people going down aisles and they would be picking product off the shelf, and then they would wheel their cart to an area to pack it out. Now they have a robot that tells them where to go, and they just stack the goods on the robot, and the robot leaves and another robot comes. So they're not going back and forth. Those are simple things that are happening, but what I'm seeing in the warehouse is incredible. And part of what is driving that is we're starting to see higher wages. UPS had a historic contract with the Teamsters, if you remember, not that long ago. And these employees were very deserving of higher wages. The challenge is that as wages go up, the relative cost of technology goes down. As wages go up, the relative cost of technology goes down. Why is that? Because when you're making the pitch for a technology solution, you're almost always comparing it against it's the as is and to be. And if the as is manual labor, that's what you're comparing it to, and that manual labor just got higher. And so, you know, the consequences of that are exactly what we're seeing with my former employer, is that they're closing a lot of facilities and they're putting up highly automated facilities. And some of these, they put a package in when they unload it, and no one touches it again until it's loaded on a vehicle. So technology is rapidly advancing, but one of the things that's always held it down, and this might be an issue for some of you, is that you have to have clean data. You have to have data integrity. So everyone is awash in data, but isn't in a format that can fit into this program, and is it correct? And it's interesting now, through AI, that garbage disposal, there's a former chief operating officer for Amazon, has a company, and he's not the only one that's trying to do this, a company that just came out called Augur, who's creating a garbage disposal for data. So data comes in the supply chain in all sorts of different ways, in PDFs, in emails. He's basically, what he's creating is all this data goes into this garbage disposal for data, and it comes out in a standard format that could be used without standards. This sounds like, okay, is that a big deal? It's game changing, because there's so many companies that can't actually leverage the technology because of their data. And here's the other thing. This is a much younger version of me. And I don't know if you can see, that laptop is about that thick. It was heavy. But I thought I was pretty cool, actually, when I had it. And this was a video I shot in 1997. And believe it or not, it was about the emerging electronic commerce environment. And we were trying to tell UPS employees that this thing, electronic commerce, we think it might be a big deal. And we think it might impact us. I had so many people that saw that and told me, you know, in no uncertain terms, that I didn't know what I was talking about. And they actually used more colorful language than that. And we all know what's happened since. But at that time, it was still unknown. And this is the way technology happens. And this is why I call it an uncertainty, because it's like lily pads on the pond, and you have if a lily pad doubles every week, and this represents technology, after the first week, you still don't notice it. After the second week, nobody notices. After the third week, you know, maybe some people that are advanced researchers, that are very in tune with technology, maybe they know. When it gets to half, a lot of people know. But then the next week, the lily pad's full. And that is, people want to think of technology going like this, and that's not true. Technology goes like this. It actually goes down. It's called an S curve, like that. And it's really hard to get your head around. Here's another big risk and uncertainty in demographics, that labor force. This is, I know it's very hard to see the numbers, but just look at the trend. It's going down. And so we haven't, in the US, our birth rate hasn't been replacing the population for a decade. And in countries in Europe, in Japan, it's been even more so. And so you want to keep productivity up, but labor is going down. labor force participation rate, the number of people that are actually in the workforce, is going down. Now, if you just take a look at people 65 and older, their participation is going up, but overall, it's still going down as the baby boomers retire. And so, immigration. So, if the population is going down and the participation rate is going down, then to keep up productivity, there's two main ways to do it. One is through immigration. The other is through technology. So more people coming into the country, into the workforce, or getting more productivity out of each individual. And that is something that is going to be a continuous challenge. The other challenge with supply chains is they're very vulnerable. And we have seen this, right? Not only did we see it during the pandemic, but just this past year, if you've had products that are going through the Panama Canal, it has nothing to do with, the political issues that are going on now about China controlling the Panama Canal. This is really environmental. It had to do with drought, and so it slowed the passage through the Panama Canal. And the issue with the Houthis attacking ships, and the reason is because there's parts of the world where ships have to go through a narrow area. Wherever that happens, they're vulnerable. So diplomacy, and I use that term lightly. Here's this equation tells a lot. So here's the equation, and I'm not a big math guy, but this is really interesting. So what it's saying is the power that A has over B. So A can be a person, a company, a country. The power that A has over B is a function of the dependence that B has on A. So think about this in terms of what's happening right now. What's happened during the pandemic. We found out how vulnerable our supply chains were, right? Because we were dependent on these other countries for critical pharmaceuticals, for electronics, semiconductors. There were military dependencies. And so that's where the deglobalization movement started. How do we take more control of our own supply chain? And so you started to see supply chains changing. So has reshoring, nearshoring happened? It has. In terms of reshoring manufacturing to the U.S., it's a pebble in a pond right now. We hear about it. There's announcements, but it's really small now when you look at the big picture. But the leading indicators is what you want to look at. Foreign direct investment to the U.S. is going up, and to Asia and specifically China is going down. So that's a leading indicator that says, okay, there's something going on here. So what's happening? So companies are doing, that have been producing in China, many have adopted what they're calling a China plus one strategy. And so they're keeping some manufacturing in China, especially to serve the Chinese market. And then they're moving a lot to Mexico, right? Mexico's been a primary beneficiary. In Asia, it's been Vietnam and India have been primary beneficiaries. And you can see the imports from Vietnam have almost doubled since 2020. So that's pretty incredible. And here we're talking about finished goods manufacturing. Keep that in mind, because remember what I said about a chain. This is the finished good, the final part of manufacturing. And then we're seeing a lot more regionalization. So, you know, we love, I think we still love, the relationship between Mexico, the US, and Canada. I hope we do. It's worked really, really well for a long time. And we're starting to see regional blocks where they're trying to move their supply chains closer to the customer. So if I can manufacture closer to the point of consumption, I take out a lot of risk and variability in my supply chain. Oh boy. But here's the elephant in the room. I didn't expect this. I did not. I don't know if anyone expected it. I definitely expected the US to be tough on China. China has not been the best trading partner, to say the least. When I was at UPS, we wanted to have operations in China. We had to work through partners. We couldn't own anything there. Stealing intellectual property. All of these things are big deals. That's not Mexico. That's not China, or that's not Canada. So this, I think, took everyone by surprise. As we saw, you know, this keeps changing. As we saw just this afternoon, it's now pulled back from, you know, postponed a month. And so I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail moving forward, especially in some of the industries that are just so dependent on this trade. And the other thing that I don't think a lot of people are thinking of is that don't underestimate China. Don't take your eye off China. This chart, if you're wondering why is China just saying so defiant about tariffs, and if you want to fight, we'll fight you. This is why. Because in the first round of tariffs in 2017, their trade, their exports kind of flattened out. And then they just kept going up. So China trade, just because the US isn't importing as much from China, they're still growing very rapidly. And we're becoming a much smaller part of the exports from China. So it's really hard for us to have a club with China, and we're seeing that. And remember, I just showed you that a lot of the manufacturing is moving to Vietnam. I spent 6 weeks in Asia in the fall. Spent a lot of time in Vietnam. And I'd been there before. Maybe I just didn't notice it. These two flags are on all the government buildings. And it's a reminder of something. Because I was going, gosh, long time ago I spent time in the Soviet Union, and that looks like the old Soviet flag. They said, oh, no. It's the flag of communism. It flies, and the right is the Vietnamese flag. Flies in every government building. Politically, they are very closely aligned with China. So if there is another Cold War, hopefully there's not. If we think that by moving some manufacturing to Vietnam we're safe, think again. Here's the last thing I'll leave you with. This is a brand new international airport. I took this picture this past November. I took it at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. It's an international airport. It's almost empty. China is investing in countries like Cambodia And when they do that, it's very good for these countries, because they couldn't build this nice international airport. But the Chinese will operate this for the next 55 years. So for the next 55 years, their country that's very dependent on tourism, China controls that. Remember the equation I just showed you. The power that A has over B is a function of the dependence that B, Cambodia, has on China. And that has happened all around the world. So, something to think about. Now I want to talk a little bit about the difference between risk and uncertainty, because it's very important as you look at what do you do. Risk can be, you can assign a probability to. It can be quantified, and companies are very good at that. Uncertainty is different. Uncertainty is what is left over after all the risk has been quantified. And how you approach that is differently. You can take proactive steps to address risk. Uncertainty, you can't. It's almost like it's like being an MMA fighter. You might be looking for the right hook, and you might get the left foot to the face. It can come from anywhere, and that's what's happening right now. So here's something to think about around the tariffs. So the tariffs are a risk. We knew that, right? Going into 2025, we knew tariffs were a risk. We didn't quite know how they would take place and all of the back and forth, but we knew that was a risk that could be quantified. And a lot of companies brought in goods, and there was a huge transportation costs went up as companies brought in goods ahead of any potential tariffs. So that's risk mitigation. That was a good thing to do. Here's what uncertainty is. Uncertainty is, how will consumers respond? How will companies respond? How will trading partners respond? How will adversaries respond? We don't know. There are things you have control over. There are things you do not have control over. We don't know right now. There are some unintended consequences that we're going to find out over the next 6 months that are hard to predict. And the way you address these uncertainties is different. And I'm going to get back to that in a moment. Everyone here knows very well how the auto industry is so integrated with the three countries. And there's even more so between the U.S. and Mexico. This was an example in the Wall Street Journal that came out 2 weeks ago. And it's a piston. It's one part that goes into a car that crosses the border between Mexico and the U.S. and Canada 6 times before it ever goes into a car and makes it onto a dealer's lot. And so think about all of those transitions, and it's not just the U.S. tariffs, if there are retaliatory tariffs. This is what the head of the auto manufacturers were pleading with the president to, cool your jets, because this is going to have a tremendous impact. But it's not just the auto industry. Yeah, the auto industry is big, but this is a lot of industry. And I want to give some props to Dr. Covarrubias and Dr. Lozano. They just published 2 really good pieces of information about the impacts. This stat of 4.3 million jobs could face trade disruption in the top 15 states. That's a very scary prospect. But in these reports, he talks, and I think correctly so, about how important regional trade integration is and this deep interconnection between our economies. Holding one down is not going to help another. That's not the way it works. And so I'm so glad that the work this center is doing in publishing things like this and and having me, up here talking to you about it. It's this exchange of information that I hope brings us to eventually to the right answer. But here we are. I've talked about the what. I've talked about the so what. But now what? Now what? Right? What do you do? I was talking to my son earlier this week, and he was all panicked because his company said his company said stop all incoming orders until we can renegotiate with our suppliers. He said, but Dad, I've got commitments. I made a commitment to the customer, and now I'm not going to be able to keep that commitment. That's happening a lot right now. And I'm sure it's happening in your companies where there's an uncertainty cost to all of these changes, where companies need some level of certainty to make decisions. And when we talk about supply chains, supply chains aren't built around the U.S.'s 4-year election cycles. If you're talking about moving a manufacturing facility, that's a 20, 30-year decision, right? And it's millions of dollars and it's lives, and so it's a very big deal. But how do you move forward? And you got to do something. And if it's not perfect, it's still, you need to move the ball forward. And an imperfect solution always outperforms one that doesn't exist. And especially if it's if it is a reversible decision. So if it's something that, if it doesn't work out, I can reverse it, you need to be less risk averse about that. You need to do those things. I talk to my kids about that as well. Like when they're talking about their careers and what they're doing, hey, if you take this one job, you can always come back, right? If you get married and have kids, not a reversible decision. Make sure that you put that, you think about that. In terms of where you're working, just go do it, right? Just don't sit on your hands. Go do it. And that applies to companies as well. So I told you about this research that I was doing that I put into my book, Organizational Velocity, and I wanted to crack the code on what is it that companies are doing and good organizations are doing. How do they think? How do they approach this uncertainty and moving forward? Because it's in times of disruption, of change like we're in right now, that you see the biggest shifts in market power, in market share between companies, both to the good and the bad. And so it's a very critical time we're in right now, because it's the deck chairs are getting shuffled, okay? So this gentleman, Colonel John Boyd, I was introduced to. I never met him. I was introduced to his work. He was a fighter pilot in the Korean War, very decorated, and was in the Marine and taught in the fighter training school, and was involved in the Vietnam War as he was still in the military. And he was like, why is it that we were so dominant in the Korean War for our air power, and we spent so much more money on the Vietnam War, and we were much less effective? And he spent time, he studied the history of war. He went back to Georgia Tech to school and studied engineering principles, and he came up with this thing that was common across everything that he saw, every success or every failure. It came around, it wasn't size, it wasn't power, it was maneuverability. It was the ability to pivot, the ability to be agile, to pivot away from danger and towards opportunity. And our businesses need to be like that in times of uncertainty. So he talked about learning fast. And what I hear a lot from companies is, oh, we're going to fail fast. And I look at them and I say, well, that's just failing fast. You don't want to do that. You want to learn. If you experiment, if you do something and you learn from it and it didn't go like you wanted, and you use those learnings to propel you to the next thing, that's not failing. That's how we learn, right? It's the 1-year-old that falls down and gets back up and tries it again. And he came up with this idea of the OODA loop that you might have heard of: observe, orient, decide, and act. So cast a wide net of observation. Try to separate the signals from the noise. So what's important about this? Decide what to do and act. And when he says act, it doesn't necessarily mean make a big investment. It means, okay, I've got a theory about what to do. Let's go test it. The other person that I was drawn to, this huge man in both intellect and stature, is a gentleman named Clayton Christensen. The late Clayton Christensen was a professor at Harvard Business School. If you've ever heard the term disruptive innovation, he's the one that coined it. And I recall when I was, starting my research, I said, well, I'm going to go to the guy that coined the term. And I was talking to our head of PR at UPS, and he laughed at me. I'm like, I'm serious. Why are you laughing at me? He said, we were doing a healthcare conference on Harvard's campus, and he charges $50,000 an hour for a presentation. And we asked him if he would lower his rate, because it's just he just has to walk across the green. And he wouldn't do it, or his people wouldn't do it. And he said, do you think he's going to give you 15 minutes if he's not going to do this for 1 hour for $50,000? I said, well, I'm asking him anyway. He ended up being on my dissertation committee because he cared about, money wasn't what he cared about. It was teaching more people about this idea of disruptive innovation, this idea of in these disruptive times, how do you move forward? And I was telling him, I was very animated one day when I was talking to him, and he was a very soft-spoken person. He said, Alan, he said, you've got to remember that God didn't create data. And then he paused. I went, okay. And he saw that I had a deer in the headlight look, and he said, I want you to think about that, and next week when we talk, come tell me what you found out. So I said, okay, and I'm going, oh my gosh. I know I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack, but I have no idea what he's talking about. And I was thinking about it, and I thought about all of those 5-year plans that I put together with dozens of people over 6 months. And after we put out the first initiative in the first year, it set off an unexpected reaction from the market that then changed what we should do the next year. And so what he was telling me is that you have to discover. You can't move forward just looking in the rear view mirror. You have to discover. You have to be active. The other key point that I learned from many of these leaders is you don't have to be right all the time. You don't always have to have the answer. And so many leaders, when they get behind closed doors, they admit that they don't have the answer, and it causes paralysis. And you know what? The leader does not have to have all the answers. That's not what a leader does. What a leader needs to do is say, this is the goal, and it needs to be what, not how to do it, what. It needs to be time-bound, actionable, and you need to support it. Just like Kennedy did when he said, I believe that we should commit ourselves to achieving the goal before the end of the decade is out, time-bound, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. He had no idea how that was going to be done. But he unleashed all this creativity within his team, and we did it, and we did it under 10 years. But in terms of testing the waters, I had a CEO tell me this that I've repeated many, many times. He said, I don't want to see a $50 million proposal until I see a $10,000 truth. What was he saying there? Is you have to get, when you're moving forward, you have to get to the commercial truth. Remember I said that you can't predict necessarily how consumers are going to react to price increases with the tariff? It's true with a lot of the things that we do. Whether we're doing things that affect our suppliers, affect our employees, affect our customers, if it's humans that we're dealing with, it's inherently unpredictable. The best way to move forward is to try it. Do small pilots. Just try it. And then, if you get some positive feedback, then move forward. And even in these times, those are things that you can still do. Don't bet the farm. I don't think betting the farm right now in these uncertain times is a good idea. But I do think small bets, so that when the opportunity arises, you're ready to seize the day, I think makes a lot of sense. It's creating optionality. And that's what all of these great companies do, because they do not know what's going to happen. So they create a set of options that allow them to pivot. So I'm going to upskill and cross-train my employees. I'm going to add some technology that allows me to cast a wide net of observation. And not only with AI, the great thing, I'm not only casting a wide net, because what good does that do if it's just data? You don't want data. You want information. You want something that you could actually use to make a decision. If it's just a bunch of data, I can't make a decision on that. I need information. And using technology to cast a wide net and will speed decision making. But again, the key here is creating options that allow you to pivot. That could be adding new suppliers. That could be putting an option on equipment. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. The other thing that I heard a lot, especially from the military people, is going on offense. This is Hermann Balk was a commander of the Panzer troops for the Third Reich. He was not a good person. But the U.S., after World War II, interviewed a lot of the German generals that were very successful in the war, overcoming much stronger opposition. What he's known for is his Panzer Division wiping out the 5th Battalion, the Russian 5th Battalion in 2 weeks. He was outnumbered 7 to 1 in tanks, 11 to 1 in infantry. And they asked him, well, how did you do it? He said, attack, attack, attack. People think that going on offense, that playing defense is less risky than going on offense. If you go on offense, you're creating your future. You're forcing other people to react to you. So another principle about how to operate in these uncertain times. And then conviction. And I just can't say enough about conviction. And I'm going to tell you a little story about a guy named Jack Levis. And Jack would never tell you this story himself, but I'm going to tell you about it. He created something called Orion. It was the first route optimization tool that UPS rolled out. And this was back in the day before we had the computational power we have now, but there was big data. And he kept at it, and he kept at it. And to the point that his managers, and I know this, were cautioning him, saying, you know, you're losing credibility because you keep trying and you keep failing. He said, I know I can do it. I know we can do this. They said, well, you know, understand that you're hurting your career doing this. Why are you beating your head against a wall? He said, because I know we can do it and it's going to serve a greater good. And he was passionate about it. He did crack the code. This Orion system saved UPS and continues to save UPS millions of dollars. It's taken so much carbon out of the atmosphere. If you've ever heard of UPS, you know, we don't, no left turns. That route optimization, that all came because of his conviction. And this is what happens in small organizations and large organizations. It's ridiculed, it's violently opposed, and then it's accepted as being self-evident. And people will jump on the bandwagon, and that is but it takes courage, it takes conviction. Okay, so we've talked about the what, the so what. We've talked about the mindset that I learned, and this is just it's not my ideas. This is just what I learned from these leaders. Some principles of operating under conditions of uncertainty. But you have businesses to run, and so what do you do on Monday? So how do you win Monday? So creating options was something that I talked about. If you look at the end-to-end supply chain, companies want to look at X-shoring. So whether it's reshoring to the U.S., more often than not, it's going to be nearshoring. The whole tariffs is kind of throwing that into a loop, but nearshoring or changing your supply chain. But essentially, an option is moving production closer to your customer. Diversifying suppliers. We're starting to see a lot more collaboration. So one of the things in sustainability, I say if you want companies to become more sustainable, one of the ways you can do that is put clear plexiglass on the side of trailers going down the highway and actually see how many are empty, quarter full, maybe half full. Okay. Limit your item assortment. So how can you take something that was an item with 3 different choices and narrow it to 2? Simplify your supply chain, reduce complexity, form postponement. So that would be like I've got a pack of athletic wraps. I'm going to bring them in bulk, and for Walgreens, I'm going to make them into a 3-pack. It's a 1-pack for this company, and it's a 5-pack for Walmart, let's say. Making those decisions later allows you flexibility, upskilling and cross-training employees, agility, reconfigurability of your supply chain, and scenario planning. I can't emphasize that enough. And scenario planning, you're not trying to choose the perfect scenario, because that will never come true, but it gets you thinking about what might happen, and you start to create a menu of options. And here I say, it's not about, don't stop at what if. Do what Warren Buffett says, and go to then what, and go at least 3 levels deep. So if I do this, then what? Okay, and then what? And you really start to get underneath what is driving your supply chain. And then demand sensing and demand shaping is all about how can I use marketing, can I use pricing to move customers towards a certain product set so I don't have as much inventory. Again, it reduces complexity. And then safety stock if you need to use it. This universal action item. If you take away one thing from this presentation, this is it. And I talk to company after company about this. And I say, do you know the minority of your suppliers, customers, or products that are responsible for the majority of your profits? Do you know that? Because especially with risk mitigation, typically what companies do is they enact their risk mitigation plan and it applies to everybody. But if you knew that these suppliers are responsible for 70% of your profits, or these customers, then you would act differently. And when you're trying to respond to tariffs, it's so very important. So which suppliers should I be really negotiating with? If they're not as important to me, I'm probably going to be more aggressive in my negotiation than someone that is just a fantastic supplier. Which customers can I pass costs on to? Which ones can't I? If you understand where your profit pools are coming from, you're going to be more targeted, and more targeted is going to be more successful. Reshoring and nearshoring. Reshoring may be an option, but understand that if it's something that is a high labor content, that's probably not going to work, because the labor cost in the U.S. is just so much higher. This is on the right is some research that we're doing at the University of Tennessee around the skills gap. And the initial findings from this are really interesting. The gold is companies that have reshored. The black is companies that are thinking about reshoring. And what's interesting about it is when you look at the companies that have actually reshored, what they say they really need: leadership, supply chain management. And then what all of them need: communication, critical thinking skills. We were thinking it was going to be advanced manufacturing skills. We thought it was going to be engineering, data scientists. No, that's not what it is. These are the things that they're telling us that they really need. And there's some huge gap. There's a huge gap on just the trades, people that actually build stuff. And some leadership insights to discuss with your team. Again, these are things that I had covered earlier. Learn fast. Make sure that you're using tech to cast a wide net. Don't try to have all the answers. Have purpose with a point. Create boundaries. Create options. Go on offense when you can, right? Put your competitor on their heels. And conviction is absolutely needed in these times. Last one that I'll leave you with. This is something that is universal. Solve for inefficient wealth, access, skill, or time. when I was running UPS's corporate venture capital fund, I met a lot of really smart people that had really great technology, and they were really proud of it. And I would sit at the end of the table and say, okay, good stuff. How does your solution solve for insufficient wealth, access, skill, or time? What? How will your solution save people money, give them access to a service or a product that they didn't have access to before, provided them access to skills that they don't have? And that's one of the things that cross-border trade, global commerce, that's one of the great things, is it allowed us to really leverage the companies that had specific skills that we needed. And then more than anything, time. How can you save time? Wealth, access, skill, or time. All of you students, if you have an idea for a new product or service or startup, think about this first, then think about the technology. Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take your questions. Yes.
First of all, can we wait until we get a microphone to you so that we can... So just for the Q&A, the way we're going to do it is we're going to bring microphones to you, and just give us a second to get that going. Then we should go through. We have some questions online as well. So try to keep your questions short. We only have a limited time for questions. So let me start with one of the online questions we have.
Sure.
And so this is from Slido. So it says, what role does AI-driven data analytics play in strategic decision-making, and how can leaders ensure they're leveraging it effectively without over-relying on automation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there's a lot of work right now around AI and actually the AI making decisions, but right now, where you really need to be thinking about AI is, how do I process a lot of information? How do I cast that wide net? And so let me give you an example that I shared this afternoon. My daughter works for Paramount Global. They're getting bought out. They had this huge prospectus, and I was able to input that into an AI program and asked a few questions about, what are the 5 most important things in this huge report? And within seconds, it brought back information. If I've got a question about, anything that has, we only have so much time to gather information. And so the way I'm using AI today, and the way a lot of companies are, is use it to cast a wide net and get down to pieces of information that you can actually understand, and then and decide whether this is real or not, right? So anything you get back from AI, and I tell this to my students, do not put it in a paper unless you can get to the source data. You have to understand where it comes from, because AI can create something that sounds really good, and it's not true, right? And you can't blame AI on a bad grade. And so that in strategic decision making, we're seeing that a lot, especially for planning, for like demand planning, because you think about all of the different things that could affect a plan, from construction on a road to weather, to where we are in terms of a holiday. There's tremendous amount of things, and being able to pull all that information in a way that allows you to then make a decision is great. And I talk to suppliers all the time about their environmental analysis, things that they do, where they look at competitors. These are things that take weeks, sometimes months for them to put together, that leveraging AI allows you to do it very quickly. So the way to think about it is a force multiplier. And that's where companies are getting the most use out of it. Yes, okay. You get to your question.
Yes, so I know you gave a bunch of helpful information here today, but I just wanted to ask specifically on supply chain. What would you recommend are good skills or strategies for someone that wants to work in supply chain? I know you worked as VP, as corporate strategy in UPS. Are there any things that you learned there that helped you as far as supply chain goes?
Yes. So the number one thing that I would say is work in an operation. You have to work in an operation. And I got to tell you, when I started with UPS and they started me, you know, and I was working in the hub in Louisville, I said, I've got my MBA. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And oh my God, it paid off my entire career because you actually have to know how value is created with the customer. Wherever that is, you want to be the point that is closest to the customer. And that's the way you learn. The other thing that I would say that I truly believe in around supply chain is you have to understand the end-to-end supply chain, from raw materials to door or store. It's absolutely critical because what we're facing right here with all of these tariffs, they're affecting one part of the supply chain, but it's a ripple effect. And if you don't understand, it's called a chain for a reason. And if you need to be able to understand if this happens, then what's going to happen here and there and there. And that's going to make you a really strong manager. The last thing I would say is understand how to talk the language of whoever, whatever a group you're talking to. So I say this all the time, that the language of the C-suite is written in numbers, not letters. And so it's great that you have all these supply chain statistics, but be able to convert that into how it actually impacts the bottom line, because that's going to get action. Just talking about throughput, you're going to get, talk about return on assets, there you go. Sure.
Are there any more questions from the audience?
Okay. Hello. I just have a quick question. So currently, for my thought processes, why would I? Do you have any acknowledgement on the BRICS currency that should be supposing within, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, in cooperation to the de-dollarization and trying to build a new order and replace the dollar? How do you think that would possibly affect the connection between people trying to build a company within the big three, with, you know, the United States, the UK, and Australia? Why would people want to build a company here, considering all the taxes and legal tape they had to go to, and not outsource and build somewhere else?
So I didn't catch the first part about that. It was something about what, the currency?
BRICS, the BRICS currency.
So I really don't have a good answer about that. So my dad told me early on, if you don't know, you don't know. But I think the other part of your question is, why would someone start a business here with all of the challenges that we have? Because it's still the most dynamic business environment in the world. It still is. And the thing that, you know, we have challenges right now. There's no doubt about it. But when you think about the creativity and the velocity of decision making and change within the U.S., think about our startup infrastructure that we have here. We have a very dynamic environment that allows people to create new companies. And there's a lot of vibrant growth. And it's one of the challenges that, quite frankly, that Europe has had, is they haven't had this vibrant growth of new companies. And in the United States, we absolutely have that. Could we lose that? Yes, we could lose that. But right now, there's no place that I know of that is as dynamic as the U.S.
More questions from the audience? We have one down here, we have one back there.
Yes, sir.
I was just curious to know what you think the most vulnerable industries are, like to the current tariffs that are potentially going to be placed.
Yeah, I would say it would be the auto industry would probably be number one, but it goes well beyond the auto industry. There is, if you think about it, it's these industries that are heavily reliant on the talents or the things that the U.S. does well and the things that Mexico does well. Because we think that, the things that Mexico does well, are we going to be able to just transfer that to the U.S.? It's not that simple. These are very dynamic economies. The cost of living, there's a lot of economic reasons. There are supply networks that have been built up in Mexico that are really hard to move over. So it is these industries, like the example that I showed you with the piston that goes back and forth 6 times. There's thousands of products that are like that, that are taking advantage of the best the 3 countries have to offer. And so I'm hoping that we can continue that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I thought it was a very good presentation. In fact, being of a certain age, you start remembering some things that repeat themselves. And I remember Thriving on Chaos back in the early 80s, early 90s, right? And it talked about how to get through those times. You talked about labor, and it's something certainly we're facing, the shortage of labor because of birth rates, immigration trends, et cetera. And in fact, we heard a presentation not too long ago that talked about companies going to Mexico. If they're going to Mexico for labor today, they're 5 years too late if they haven't locked down the labor yet. But what about the equation that you showed us in terms of A influencing B, it depends on. How have you found that organizations or companies are keeping employees? What, the influence they have over the employer is great. I'm leaving tomorrow, you need to give me X, Y, Z. We can only offer so many buffet tables and swimming pools. I think there has to be another answer to that. And in your research, have you seen what kind of influence companies are able to exert to be able to help be remained with an organization and not travel and travel and travel?
Yeah. So the research will tell you that the number one people leave companies is not because of what they're being paid. It's the work environment and who they're working with, and specifically their direct manager. And does their direct manager care about them? The other thing that tends to keep people, that's much harder, is purpose. And that's the one slide that I was getting at. Is it a job, or is there a big why there? Why are they there? What does this company do that improves the lives of others? It's part of me. It's part of my identity. It's very hard to leave that type of company. But it also takes a management that is taking an interest in the employee, and it's getting more difficult because with remote work, you don't have that same interaction. And Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It is as true now as it has ever been. Culture is very important, and so you build a strong culture, you have that purpose, that's one thing. The management relationship is another, but at some point you are going to get attrition. The question is how much. Yeah, and can you reduce it? But you will get attrition for sure.
I have one more online question, then we have time for one more audience question. So if you have a question, think of it carefully. So next online question is, what are the key factors leaders should prioritize when making strategic decisions to stay competitive and resilient in 2025?
What decisions should they
What are the key factors leaders should prioritize when making strategic decisions in 2025?
Yeah, so again, the balance is you have to be thinking about good times come and good times go, right? And so this too will pass. How are you preparing your company today to be a fast mover when things change? Because again, the good times don't last, the bad times don't last. But the other thing, and I was always reminded this at UPS as I tried to get people to focus on the long term, is that, and I'm sure you've heard this, well, Alan, if we don't focus on the short term, there will be no long term, right? So you have to make the decisions that are going to keep the business moving forward. But part of what I was talking about creating those options is you want to be able to, it's not just pivoting away from danger. That's what we're talking about now. But at some point, you're going to be able to pivot to opportunity. So what are you doing now around, for example, your employees? So that they're ready as things change. So that they're ready to take on and operate some of these new, more highly automated technical systems or planning systems or route optimization programs. How are you doing that? You can invest in that right now, and it is, in the big scheme of things, it's a relatively small investment. It is consider it in the financial, it's kind of like a financial option that you don't have to use, but if you have the opportunity, you can execute. That's what you want to be creating during these tumultuous times.
We have one more time for the question from the audience. If people have a question, there's one back there, and I think that will have to be it.
Thank you so much for your informative session. I have a small question. So how does a company prioritize between cost optimization and customer service under the domain of supply chain? Thank you.
I thought you said that was a small question. So how does a company prioritize between cost optimization and customer service? I'm going to give you the classic answer: it depends. But I'm being serious about that because the answer to that question really depends on who is the company and what does the company stand for. If this company is Walmart and they're all about being a low-price leader, I would say cost optimization, right? If they're BMW, I would say prioritize the customer because there is no one right supply chain. The supply chain supports the strategy. And when companies get that out of whack, that's when they get in trouble. The supply chain supports the strategy, and so what you are all about, the value that you create for the consumer, whether it's wide variety, low cost, or maybe it's special services, that's going to dictate where you prioritize. And then don't forget what I said about understanding where the profits come from, because in terms of where you're focusing your effort, You want to make sure that you're not diluting your efforts too much, trying to be everything to everybody, because that's a recipe for failure.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Dr. Amling, for this excellent talk.
Thank you.
But I want to stress that a lot of other people have played a role in making this work. Of course, I want to thank IBC and Commerce Bank again for their generous support of this lecture series. I also want to thank Amy Palacios, the Associate Director of the Center for Western Hemispheric Trade, who manages the center and this event. Finally, I want to thank the staff in the center and the School of Business who have kindly shown up to help with the organization, and the students in the Student Council for all their hard work, bringing you microphones, managing the doors, and doing all those great things. So thank you. And then finally, I want to thank OIT and Event Services for all their help keeping us online and keeping people here. So thank you for that. And I want to thank finally all of you for coming. I think this has been a great talk, and I'm glad that you made it. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
And one other thing is I have our. I always forget this. This is. We want to present a token of our appreciation to Dr. Amling, and so we want to give him the world, so we can't do that, so we'll just give him the globe.
Wow. Thank you. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. What an honor. Thank you, everybody. Very nice.